The night was cruel, the storm howled over the mountains, and the snow fell heavy like endless white dust from the sky. A lone human walked through the storm, his boots sinking deep with every step. His name was Daniel, a traveler with no home, a man carrying sorrow heavier than the pack on his back. His family was gone, his heart broken, and he had no reason to keep moving except to keep breathing. But then, something caught his eyes in the blizzard. At first he thought it was a fallen tree, half buried in snow. But when he came closer, he saw the shape was not wood, it was a body. He dropped to his knees, brushing the snow away, his breath caught. It was not human, her skin was violet, glowing faintly even under the storm's gray light. Her ears pointed, her body wrapped in torn white cloth, her arm was bent at a strange angle, twisted and broken. For a moment Daniel froze, his instincts screamed that she was an alien, a stranger, maybe even dangerous. He should leave her. He had no reason to risk his life, not for anyone. He had lost everything once before, and helping her might only bring more pain. But then he looked at her face. Her lips were trembling, her eyes half open, shining with silent tears. And in that moment, she didn't look like a monster or an enemy. She looked like someone who was simply in pain, someone who needed help. Daniel tore off his heavy jacket and wrapped it around her. Her skin felt like ice, colder than the snow itself. She let out a weak sound, almost a whisper, words in a language he could not understand. He pressed his hand to her cheek, trying to comfort her even though she could not hear his heart. He thought of the night when his wife had died in his arms, her eyes begging for help he could not give. He would not let this one die the same way. Not again. Lifting her was hard. Her body was light but stiff from the cold. Her broken arm hung useless at her side. Each step Daniel took was heavy, the storm fighting him, the snow trying to bury them both. But he did not stop. His legs burned, his breath came out in sharp gasps. He knew if he stopped she would freeze, and maybe he would too. Finally, he found a cave, dark and shallow, but enough to block the storm. He laid her gently on the ground, shaking from exhaustion. His fingers worked fast. He built a fire with trembling hands. His heart raced as the flame finally came alive, filling the cave with orange light. He turned back to her. Her violet skin reflected the fire's glow, making her look like something out of a dream. Her breathing was shallow, her broken arms swollen. Daniel tore a strip of cloth from his own shirt. His hands were rough, clumsy, but steady with purpose. He bound her arm, trying to set it straight. She groaned in pain, her eyes opening wide for a moment. She stared at him, those eyes shining like silver in the firelight, full of fear and confusion, but also something else, a tiny spark of hope. Daniel whispered, "You'll be okay." Even though she could not understand. He didn't know if he was lying. He didn't know if she would survive the night, but he knew he had to try. His heart would not let him walk away. Hours passed slowly. The storm outside roared like a beast, but inside the cave the fire held strong. Daniel sat by her side, keeping the flames alive, watching her chest rise and fall. Each time her breath came shallow, he feared it would be the last. But then she would breathe again, and relief washed over him. At one point, her lips moved, whispering again in her strange language. He leaned closer, trying to catch the words. He couldn't understand, but her voice carried sorrow, a kind of pain he knew too well. He reached out, brushing the snow from her hair, and whispered back, "I'm here." His voice cracked, his eyes heavy, but he meant every word. She reached weakly with her unbroken arm. Her fingers brushed against his chest. He froze at the touch. It was not strength, not an attack, just a simple gesture, a need for warmth, for closeness. He let her hand rest there, pressed against his beating heart. For the first time in years, that broken heart felt alive again. Outside, the storm began to fade. The first light of dawn touched the snow, painting the world in pale blue. Inside the cave, a human sat with an alien in his arms, a fire burning between them. He had mended her broken arm as best as he could, and without knowing it, she had already begun to mend something deeper inside him. That night, in the frozen mountains, two lost souls had found each other, and though they did not yet know it, this was only the beginning of their story. The storm outside finally calmed, but inside the cave the silence felt heavy. The fire cracked softly, throwing light across the rough stone walls. Daniel sat close to the alien woman, watching her chest rise and fall. Every breath she took gave him a small piece of relief, but her broken arm still looked swollen, her body shivering even under his jacket. He had done what little he could. He had bound the arm, warmed her with the fire, and kept her alive through the night. But now he faced questions that had no easy answers. Who was she? Where did she come from? And most of all, why did she look at him with eyes full of sorrow, like she carried a pain that went far beyond a broken bone when the first light of morning slipped? Into the cave, her silver eyes fluttered open. She blinked at the fire, then at him. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but what came out was a whisper in her own language, soft and broken. He leaned closer, shaking his head. "I can't understand you," he said gently. She frowned, a look of frustration passing over her face, and then she tried again, speaking slower, but the words were still foreign to him. Still, pain was a language Daniel knew. He didn't need her words to see the suffering. Her eyes told him everything. She carried grief, heavy and sharp, grief he recognized because it was the same weight he carried in his own heart. He touched his chest lightly, then pointed at her arm, shaking his head as if to say, "Hurt." She stared, then slowly nodded, understanding in silence. For a long while they just sat there, the fire their only companion. Daniel broke off pieces of dried bread from his pack and held one out. She hesitated, suspicious, but hunger overcame her fear. She took it, her fingers brushing against his hand, and ate slowly, as if every bite was a struggle. He smiled faintly, glad to see her gaining a little strength. When she finished, she leaned back against the stone wall, her eyes drifting shut. But then, with a sudden effort, she opened them again. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment it felt as though she was searching his soul. Then she whispered something soft, her hand touching her chest. The sound of her voice was fragile, like glass ready to break. Daniel felt the urge to answer. He placed his hand on his own chest and whispered, "Daniel." He spoke his name slowly, pointing to himself. Her eyes flickered. She repeated the sound, "Neil." The way she said it made his heart twist. Her voice gave his name a meaning he had almost forgotten, a meaning that reminded him he was still alive, still human, still someone. She pressed her hand again to her chest and spoke a word. It was her name. He did not understand it fully, but he repeated it, clumsy and broken. She gave a faint smile, the first sign of warmth on her face. That small smile was like a spark in the cold cave, warming him more than the fire. But as the hours passed, Daniel began to see the deeper wound inside her. Every time the fire cracked too loudly, she flinched. Every time the wind whistled outside, her body trembled. It was not just the broken arm that hurt her. It was something else, something hidden deep inside her. Daniel understood that kind of pain. He knew it too well. He had lost his family years ago. He had carried his wife in his arms as she took her last breath. He remembered the emptiness in her eyes, the silence that followed. He had been living with that silence ever since. Now, as he looked at the alien woman, he felt as if her silence matched his own. Two different worlds, but the same wound. When night returned, she tried to sleep. Her breathing grew uneven and suddenly she cried out, not in words but in raw pain. Her hand clutched the bandages on her arm, her eyes filled with tears. Daniel moved quickly, holding her steady. "It's okay," he whispered again and again. She didn't understand the words, but his voice, his touch, his steady presence, these she understood. She leaned against him, trembling, and he wrapped his arms around her carefully. Her tears fell against his chest, warm despite the cold. In that moment, Daniel felt something shift inside him. For years, his heart had been silent, closed, broken. Now, sitting with this alien woman in the dark cave, hearing her pain echo his own, he felt that silence begin to crack. Her pain was not only hers, it was theirs, shared between them. Hours later, she finally slept again. Exhausted, Daniel sat awake, staring at the fire. He thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together, a human with no reason to live and an alien who seemed close to giving up. Perhaps it was chance, perhaps it was destiny. He did not know, but he knew one thing with certainty. He would not leave her, not now, not ever. As the fire burned low, Daniel whispered softly into the quiet cave, "You're not alone anymore." She could not understand his words, but in her sleep her hand reached out and rested over his heart, and for the first time in years he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, his broken heart could still be healed. The cave was quiet, the fire a faint glow against the stone walls. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world covered in endless white. Daniel woke first, his body stiff from the cold ground. His eyes fell on the alien woman beside him, still wrapped in his jacket, her breathing slow but steady. For a moment he only watched her, wondering who she really was. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, her skin glowing faintly with violet light, her silver eyes still closed in uneasy dreams. He thought of the night before, of her tears, of the way she had whispered her name, a sound so soft he had nearly missed it. He repeated it now under his breath, clumsy and broken, but it felt important to say it. Her name, her identity. It meant she was not just a wounded stranger, she was someone. As the fire crackled, she stirred, her eyes opened slowly, meeting his. For a moment, fear flashed across her face, but then she saw the fire, saw him, and her body relaxed a little. She whispered something in her language, her voice weak but clear. He shook his head, smiling gently. "I don't understand," he said. She frowned, trying again, this time pointing to herself, repeating her name. Daniel nodded quickly, repeating it again. This time she smiled faintly, her lips curved just a little, like the fire had touched her heart. Then she pointed at him, tilting her head. He understood. He placed his hand on his chest. "Daniel," he said. Her voice tried the name once more, soft and unsure. Neil. The sound of it from her lips made his heart ache in a strange, unexpected way. The silence between them was heavy, not empty, but filled with questions neither could answer. She glanced at her broken arm, then at the fire. Her eyes held a shadow, a memory that weighed her down. Daniel saw it. He had carried that same shadow for years. His grief was not written on his skin, but it lived inside him. Now he saw it living inside her too. He wanted to ask her what had happened, why she was out in the snow, why her arm was broken, but the words were useless. Instead, he offered another piece of bread. She accepted it carefully, her fingers brushing his hand again. Every small touch felt like a bridge between their worlds. Later, when the day grew brighter, Daniel stepped outside the cave to gather more wood. The snow crunched under his boots. The sky was pale blue, clear after the storm, but the silence of the mountains pressed heavy on him. As he bent to pick up branches, he thought of the woman inside. He had saved her body, but something deeper still hurt her. He could see it in her eyes. He knew that kind of wound, the kind that never truly healed. When he returned, she was awake. Sitting near the fire, her silver eyes followed him carefully. She pointed to his arm where a scar stretched across his skin. She touched her own chest, speaking softly. He didn't know her words, but he felt her meaning. She was asking if he too had known pain. Daniel froze, then slowly nodded. He touched his chest, then the scar, then let his hand fall. His eyes grew distant, remembering his wife, the day he lost everything. She watched him, her expression softening. For the first time since they met, her gaze was not full of fear but of understanding. That night, as the fire burned low, she finally tried to speak again. Her voice shook, the words broken, but Daniel caught fragments, a sound like family, another like gone. Her eyes filled with tears. He didn't need the rest. He understood. She had lost her people, just as he had lost his. He reached across the fire, gently taking her hand. Her violet skin was warm now, not cold like before. She looked at him, surprised, but did not pull away. For a long moment they sat like that, silent but not alone. Then, with a shaky breath, she whispered his name again. "Daniel." He answered softly with hers, repeating it as best he could. In that exchange, something changed. They were no longer strangers lost in the snow. They were two broken souls sharing their secrets. The wind outside howled through the mountains, but inside the cave a fragile bond was growing. He had mended her arm, and she had begun to open the wounds of her heart to him. In the firelight, their eyes met, and Daniel felt something he thought he had lost forever: hope. And as the flames burned low, he realized that maybe, just maybe, the snow had not brought him another burden, but a reason to keep moving. A secret connection, fragile but real, that could turn the silence of pain into the warmth of something new. The night returned heavy and cold. The fire inside the cave burned low. Daniel sat with his back against the stone wall, his eyes half closed. He wanted to rest, but his body stayed tense. Something in the air felt wrong. The alien woman slept beside him, her broken arm bound in cloth. Her face looked calm for the first time since he found her. The firelight painted her violet skin in shades of gold and purple, making her seem less like a stranger and more like something fragile he had to protect. Daniel's thoughts wandered. He wondered who she really was, why she had been out there in the snow, alone, broken. A sound cut through his thoughts, a faint crunch outside the cave. Daniel's eyes snapped open. His hand went to the knife at his belt. He listened, holding his breath. Another crunch came, soft but steady. Someone, or something, was moving in the snow. He rose quietly, careful not to wake her. The fire flickered as he stepped closer to the cave mouth. The night outside was dark, the moon hidden behind heavy clouds. The snow reflected faint light, but shadows moved where they should not. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He was not alone. Then he saw them. Figures in the distance, dark shapes against the snow, moving low, moving carefully, like hunters stalking prey. His gut told him they were not human. Their steps were too light, too fast, too silent. He turned back to the cave. His eyes met hers. She was awake now, her silver eyes wide. She had heard them too. Fear spread across her face. Her lips whispered something in her language, fast, desperate. Daniel shook his head. "I don't understand," he whispered back, but he could see the truth in her trembling eyes. Whoever was out there, they were after her. She pushed herself up, even with her broken arm. Her breath came in sharp gasps. She pointed toward the cave entrance, then shook her head violently. Her meaning was clear. They could not run. They would be found. Daniel's heart pounded. He had no reason to fight for her, no reason to risk his life again, but as he looked at her, pale and shivering in the firelight, he knew the choice had already been made. He tightened his grip on the knife, his jaw set. If danger came, it would have to pass through him first. The shadows outside grew closer. He heard low voices now, harsh and guttural, words in the same language she had whispered. But these voices carried no sorrow, only cruelty. Daniel glanced at her. She was trembling, her eyes filled with dread. Her lips moved soundlessly, repeating one word again and again like a prayer. Then the first figure appeared at the mouth of the cave, tall and lean, eyes glowing faintly. A weapon gleamed in its hand. Its gaze fell on the alien woman, and it grinned. Daniel felt the hairs on his neck rise. Without thinking, he stepped forward, knife in hand. The figure paused, surprised. Its eyes flicked from Daniel to the woman and back. Then it let out a sharp call and more shadows moved into view. 3, 4, maybe more. Their weapons caught the firelight, sharp and deadly. The woman gasped, her broken arm pressed to her chest. She whispered Daniel's name. A plea. His grip tightened on the knife. His body shook with fear, but he stood tall, blocking the cave entrance with his own frame. "You want her," he growled under his breath. "You go through me." The hunters laughed, harsh and cold. One stepped forward, raising its weapon. The firelight glinted off the blade. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. His heart screamed at him to run, but his feet did not move. He had failed once before, failed to protect the one he loved. He would not fail again. The first strike came fast. A blade swung toward him. He ducked, his knife flashing upward. The clash of metal rang out. Sparks lit the cave mouth. The alien woman cried out, her voice echoing against the stone. Daniel fought with desperation. His moves were clumsy but fueled by pure will. He slashed, blocked, pushed back. His arms burned, his chest ached, but he stood his ground. The hunters pressed harder, 2 against 1, blades flashing in the firelight. The woman crawled closer to the fire, her good hand reaching. Suddenly a burst of strange light came from her palm, a sharp flare of violet energy. It struck one of the hunters, throwing him back into the snow. Daniel froze in shock. She had power she had kept hidden until now. Her silver eyes blazed. Her voice rose in a sharp cry. The hunters hesitated, but only for a moment. Their fury returned, stronger than before. Daniel stood again, his knife dripping with snow and blood. He glanced at her, breathless. "We fight together," he said. She didn't understand the words, but she nodded. The battle raged at the cave mouth. Fire and steel clashed with light and shadow. Daniel moved with stubborn strength, and the alien woman, though weak and broken, unleashed bursts of power that lit the night sky. Together, they pushed the hunters back, step by step, until finally the figures retreated into the dark snow, their voices fading into the wind. Silence returned, broken only by Daniel's ragged breathing. He dropped to his knees, his body shaking. She crawled to his side, her glowing hand touching his chest, her eyes filled with gratitude and fear all at once. She whispered his name, soft and trembling. Daniel looked at her, exhausted but alive. He had stood against death, and for the first time in years he had fought for something worth protecting. He had fought for her. And as he looked into her silver eyes, he knew this was no longer just survival. It was something more, something stronger. The hunters were gone, for now. But both Daniel and the alien woman knew they would return, and when they did, the two of them would be ready. Not as strangers, but as something closer, something bound by fire, blood, and the choice to stand together in the dark. The cave smelled of smoke and blood. The fire burned brighter now, fed by the fight. But its warmth could not hide the fear still hanging in the air. Daniel leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling fast. His knife was stained, his arms trembling, but his eyes stayed locked on the cave entrance, waiting, watching. The alien woman knelt beside him, her silver eyes wide, glowing faintly in the firelight. Her good hand touched his shoulder. She whispered something soft, a sound he did not know but felt deep inside, a sound that carried both thanks and sorrow. Daniel looked at her, his jaw tight. "They'll come back," he muttered under his breath. His voice was low, tired, but certain. She didn't understand his words, but she understood his fear. Her broken arm throbbed with pain, yet her body leaned closer to his. She pressed her forehead gently against his shoulder, a gesture he did not expect. For a moment, Daniel froze. His heart had been locked for so long, but this small act broke through. He let out a breath he had been holding for years. His hand rose slowly, resting against her back, careful not to startle her. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the air. Shadows danced across the cave walls. Outside, the snow fell in silence. But inside the cave, two souls sat close, bound not by words but by the fight they had just survived. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. She lifted her good hand and pressed it to her chest, whispering her name once more. Daniel repeated it, stronger this time. His voice filled the cave. Her lips curved into a soft smile. She pointed at him. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was weak but steady. He nodded, his throat tight, hearing his name spoken as if it mattered again. Hours passed, but neither of them slept. Daniel fed the fire while she leaned against the wall, her body shaking from exhaustion. At one point, she reached for his hand. Her fingers slid into his, small and fragile. For a long moment, Daniel did not move. His hand trembled, but then he closed his fingers around hers. Their hands stayed locked together, the firelight wrapping them in warmth. He remembered the night his wife had died, how her hand had slipped from his, cold and lifeless. He had promised himself never to feel that pain again, never to open his heart again. But now, sitting beside this alien woman, holding her trembling hand, he realized something. He was afraid, but he did not want to let go. The silence broke when she suddenly winced, her broken arm pulsing with sharp pain. Daniel reacted quickly. He pulled out a strip of cloth from his pack and carefully checked the bandages. His hands were rough, but his touch was gentle. She hissed in pain, biting back a cry. He looked into her eyes, his voice low. "I'm sorry." She could not understand, but she seemed to feel the meaning. She nodded, her eyes softening. When he finished, she leaned closer again, whispering words he could not understand, but her tone was clear. It was trust. It was surrender. She was no longer afraid of him. She had chosen to place her life in his hands. Daniel stared into the fire, his thoughts heavy. He had lived alone for so long, walking through the world like a ghost. But now he felt alive again, not because of himself, but because of her. She gave him a reason to fight, a reason to stay, a reason to live. As the night deepened, she began to hum softly. Her voice was low, almost like a lullaby. The sound filled the cave, echoing against the stone. Daniel closed his eyes, listening. It was a song from her people, he guessed, a memory of a world far away. But even though he did not understand the words, the melody touched him. It was sad, but inside that sadness was comfort. Her voice faded, and she looked at him, silver eyes reflecting the fire. He whispered softly, "Beautiful." She tilted her head, not knowing the word, but the way he said it made her smile again. For the first time since the storm, Daniel saw more than sorrow in her face. He saw strength, he saw hope. Then, without warning, the fire cracked loudly. She flinched, her body stiff with fear. Daniel pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her. She pressed against him, trembling. His hand stroked her hair slowly. He whispered again, "It's okay. You're safe." His words were useless to her ears, but his voice was enough. In that moment, Daniel realized what was happening. It was not only her arm he was healing. It was not only her body he was protecting. It was her heart. Just as she was healing his, fire and trust had become their bond. Forged in danger, kept alive by closeness. Outside, the snow kept falling. The hunters would surely return. But Daniel no longer felt alone. The alien woman's hand was still locked with his, her head resting against his chest. For the first time in years, his broken heart was beating not with pain, but with purpose. And as he looked down at her sleeping face, Daniel whispered a promise, soft but unshakable. "I won't let them take you." She did not hear the words, but she did not need to. Her trust in him was already unspoken, already stronger than fear. The night grew darker, but in the cave, the fire burned bright, carrying with it a bond that nothing in the snow could break. The fire had burned through most of the night. Its glow painted the cave walls with soft light. Daniel sat awake, though his body begged for rest. Beside him, the alien woman slept, her head resting against his arm, her breath slow and steady. He watched her carefully, guarding the fragile piece they had found. When morning came, pale light slipped through the mouth of the cave. Daniel moved gently, trying not to wake her. He stood, his legs stiff, and stepped outside. The air was cold but still. The storm had passed, and the mountains stretched silent and endless. Snow sparkled under the weak sun, yet the beauty felt heavy, dangerous. He knew the hunters could return at any moment. He gathered more wood, carrying it back into the cave. She stirred at the sound, her silver eyes opening slowly. For a moment, confusion filled her face, but then she saw him, and her gaze softened. She whispered his name, broken but clear. "Daniel." He smiled faintly. Hearing his name on her lips gave him strength he thought he had lost long ago. Her arm was still bound, swollen, but better than before. Daniel crouched beside her, checking the bandages. She winced, biting her lip, but did not pull away. His hands were gentle, steady. Her eyes stayed on him the whole time, watching not with fear but with something warmer, something that looked like trust. When he finished, she reached with her good hand, touching his chest lightly. Her voice spoke in her language, slow, careful, as if teaching him. She pointed to herself, said her name, then pointed to him. Daniel. He repeated her name, clumsy but earnest. She smiled and nodded, then she repeated again, this time slower, guiding him. He tried again, and her laugh filled the cave, soft and musical. It had been years since Daniel had heard laughter. His chest tightened, not with pain this time, but with something new. He found himself hugging with her, quietly, awkwardly, but real. The sound echoed against the stone walls, chasing away the shadows of fear. As the day passed, they began to build their own language, small gestures, simple sounds. He showed her the word fire, pointing to the flames. She repeated, her tongue struggling. Fire. He nodded, smiling. She touched her chest, speaking a word softly, perhaps heart, perhaps soul. He did not know, but he repeated it. His clumsy voice made her laugh again. In those small moments, Daniel realized healing was not only about fixing her arm, it was about breaking the silence they both carried. She was teaching him to live again, piece by piece. Later, when she rested, Daniel stepped outside once more. His eyes searched the white horizon. Every shadow looked like danger. Every sound of the wind made his hand grip the knife tighter. The hunters were still out there. He knew it, but now his fear was not for himself. It was for her. He had something to protect again, and that made his heart beat stronger. Back inside, she sat by the fire, humming softly. It was the same melody she had sung before. Her voice was low, almost trembling, but it filled the cave with warmth. Daniel sat beside her, closing his eyes, letting the song carry him. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Not the empty peace of silence, but the living peace of connection. She stopped humming and looked at him. Her eyes were full of questions. Her lips moved, trying to shape his language. Why? She whispered clumsily. Daniel's eyes opened. He stared at her, shocked. She had spoken his word. He swallowed, unsure how to answer. His chest ached with old memories, but he forced a smile. Because I couldn't leave you, he said softly. She tilted her head, not understanding the words, but she seemed to feel them. Her hand squeezed his. As night fell again, Daniel rebuilt the fire. She leaned closer, her body tired, her head rested against his chest. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her carefully. She whispered his name again, soft as a prayer. Daniel. He whispered hers in return, clumsy but true. In that quiet, Daniel thought of his broken past, the pain he had carried for so long. For years he had been empty, wandering without purpose. But now as he held her close, he realized something important. She was not just someone he had saved, she was someone who had saved him. She had mended something he thought was lost forever. Her arm would heal with time, but what she had done for his heart was already complete. She had brought him back to life. The fire burned low, the snow fell silent outside. And inside the cave, two broken souls had begun to heal. Not with words, not with medicine, but with trust, laughter, and the quiet promise of tomorrow. The storm had passed, and the mountain air was sharp and clear. Daniel stood at the cave's edge, looking out across the endless snow, his breath curled in the cold morning air. He had spent so many years wandering, lost in sorrow, but now his steps felt heavier, not from loneliness, but from the weight of choice. For the first time, he was not alone. Behind him, the alien woman stirred. Her silver eyes opened slowly, catching the sunlight that spilled into the cave. She sat up with effort, her broken arm still bound but healing. Daniel turned, his eyes softening when he saw her awake. She gave him a small smile, weak but full of meaning. She whispered his name, Daniel, and the sound carried through the cave like music. He walked back to her, crouching beside the fire. He offered her water from his flask. She drank slowly, her trembling fingers brushing against his hand. Her touch lingered, warm despite the cold. He felt his heart beat faster. Aidan. Ellen he thought had died long ago was alive again. Her lips moved, trying to shape his words. Go, she whispered clumsily, pointing outside the cave. Daniel frowned, shaking his head. No, not without you, he said. His voice was firm. His hand touched her good one. She might not have understood the words, but she understood his eyes. She blinked fast, fighting tears. The days that followed were quiet but full. Together they built a fragile rhythm. Daniel hunted small animals in the snow, bringing food. She cleaned wounds with careful hands. They sat by the fire, sharing broken words, small gestures, laughter that filled the emptiness. He taught her his words slowly. Snow, fire, heart, she repeated, her tongue struggling but eager. And in return she taught him hers, sounds soft and flowing like water. At night she sometimes woke with fear, crying out in her language, haunted by memories of hunters. Daniel would hold her close, whispering gently, "You're safe. I'm here." She didn't know the meaning, but his steady arms told her everything she needed, and each time she would rest her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat until sleep returned. One evening, as the fire glowed low, she reached for him. Her fingers traced the scars on his arm, her eyes filled with sorrow and curiosity. She whispered something soft. He shook his head, lowering his gaze. His voice cracked. "I lost them." His words spilled out even though she could not understand. "My wife, my child, my family." He pressed his hand to his chest. "Gone." Her hand lifted, pressing against his heart. Her eyes shimmered with tears. She did not need his words. She felt his pain, just as he had felt hers. In silence, she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply breathed together, two broken souls who had found each other in the snow. When the hunters finally returned, they were ready. Daniel stood with his knife, his body steady. The alien woman stood beside him, her arms still weak but her spirit strong. Her silver eyes glowed, her hand shining with violet light. Together they faced the shadows. Their strength was not just in blade or power, but in the bond they had built. The battle was fierce, but this time they fought as one. Daniel's strikes were sharp, her bursts of light fierce. The hunters, sensing their unity, faltered. Fear spread through their ranks, and one by one they fell back, retreating into the snow. Their voices faded into the wind, leaving only silence behind. Exhausted, Daniel dropped to his knees. She knelt beside him, her glowing hand pressing against his wounds. Her touch soothed his pain, her eyes filled with fierce relief. She whispered his name over and over, "Daniel, Daniel." And when he looked at her, bloodied but alive, he whispered hers in return, clumsy but strong. The fight was over, but their story was only beginning. The mountain air was cold, yet inside the cave, warmth filled the space, not just from fire, but from something deeper. Daniel sat with her in his arms, and he realized the truth. He had mended her broken arm, but she had mended something greater. She had healed his broken heart. When dawn came again, they stepped out of the cave together. The snow stretched wide, endless and bright, but the world no longer looked empty. She slipped her hand into his, her violet fingers curling around his human ones. He looked at her, and for the first time in years he smiled. They walked forward, not as strangers, not as survivors, but as two souls bound by trust, pain, and the choice to stay together. Daniel had saved her body, but she had saved his spirit, and though the mountains still loomed dangerous, their path was no longer cold. For now, and for whatever came after, they were not broken anymore. They were whole, because they had found each other.